Chess Championship 2016. Right now we're in Washington Square Park, and this is where the real street chess in New York City is going down. I'm here with Omar. How are you doing?
Okay, and you?
I'm fine, thank you. And can you tell me first, before we play this game, what is New York City street chess all about?
Well, street chess is everything that they said you can't do, you actually can do. It's like thinking outside the box, because everything don't work by the books.
And how good are usually players that play here?
How good the players are, or the guys, the average guy that come plays?
The guys.
The top player here is maybe 2450, but the average guy here is about 1800.
Wow, okay, so let's try to start this game. You're going to start my clock, right?
Yes, anytime you're ready.
I'm ready. All right, I'll start with this move.
Did you know Bobby Fischer used to play here too?
Did he?
Yes.
Did you ever play him?
I wasn't around at the time. These older guys, they was here. They've been playing for like 20, 30 years. I've only been playing for 5 years down here with these guys.
Wow.
And when you play street chess, it helps you to combine your game with book chess and street chess. You become a better player. Like Fischer, you got to learn how to think outside the box too.
Do you know the World Chess Championship is going on in New York City right now?
Yes, I heard about it the other day, but I don't know exactly who's winning right now. The last time I heard it was 2 draws, but that's exciting to have it in New York.
Yeah. And it's exciting to play this game of chess. I need to start focusing now because I think I'm losing. So let's get back to the studio.
You didn't lose.
I didn't lose. Yay!
It is very nice in Washington Square Park, but it sure is nice here at the Fulton Market. And we're going into Game 5 in the World Chess Championships 2016. My name is Knut Skeie Solberg. I will be your host, and I'm so happy to welcome a new expert in the studio, Grandmaster from America, Sam Shanklin. How is it to be here?
It's wonderful. I'm actually from California, so this is not really my neck of the woods in America, but I'm delighted to be here at the World Championship match, and hopefully I can give some good insights.
And Peter Doggers from chess.com, welcome. What did you do on the rest day?
I actually met a lot of friends who live here, and I went up the One World observation desk to get a good view of the city. And I was looking down, and I saw a sports court, basketball court, and I was joking that Magnus might be playing some basketball there. And there you had it. A few hours later, I saw a Norwegian TV report, and Magnus was actually playing basketball there. So very good for the World Champions to do some sports. I also know, by the way, that Sergei Karjakin enjoyed the weather as well. He was in Central Park for a long stroll and kind of a photo shoot there. So both of them enjoyed the outside.
Sam, I know you played basketball against Magnus Carlsen. He is fairly better than you in chess. Who's the better basketball player?
Well, I don't want to be talking a bunch of nonsense about who plays better basketball. I'd just like to point out that he is Norwegian and I am American.
What do you like to do in the rest days?
Much like Magnus, I'm a big believer in physical exercise, both because I really enjoy it and also because I think it's good for chess players. So at lots of tournaments I'll be running or playing soccer or basketball or you name it. I'm a very physical guy, and yeah, that's the kind of thing that makes me happy.
Peter Doggers, what kind of game do you think we'll have today?
It's going to be a good game, I think, yeah. And I think the world champion is gonna really go for it today, actually. Getting some new energy from the basketball and the sunshine. And yeah, I think we've seen Sergei Karjakin under pressure for 2 days in a row, and I think he's worried today.
That will be exciting to see. We'll now see how it went on day 4.
Go Team Magnus!
Go Team Karjakin!
You move Karjakin.
Go Team Carlsen.
Go Magnus Carlsen.
Go Team Karjakin.
Go Team Carlsen.
Karjakin is the man.
Go Sergei Karjakin.
Go Magnus.
It's disappointing for sure, but you know, I'll try again next time.
How are you able to keep your head cold and to save a draw when, as you're saying, this is getting worse and worse, and you're in your very first World Championship?
Okay, but I have to keep fighting. There is no way back because I'm here to fight in every game. So. It's my job. It was a question of one move because I played bishop takes h6 here and I thought it was brilliant. But after he played queen c6, I realized what am I done. So I had to start to defend, and it was of course very unpleasant. But then later on, maybe I should not have played h4, but still I believe it's very bad for white. And here, of course, it's very close to be winning for black. I was expecting bishop e6, and I don't know. I don't believe white can save this position.
The last 2 days of the World Championships has given us 13 hours of intense chess. Sam, Magnus Carlsen doing his creative attacks and Sergei Karjakin doing his world-class defense. What do you think we'll see today?
Well, I think Magnus is certainly hoping for more of the same. I mean, he's outplaying Karjakin in the middle game, and he's gotten two very promising endgames in a row. Now, Karjakin managed to save both of them, but I think if he keeps getting himself into this kind of trouble, sooner or later he's going to slip. There's no way around that. So I think Magnus just wants more of the same, and Karjakin is looking for probably some kind of different direction. I don't know what his match strategy will be, but I think he's going to be trying to play a bit better in the middle game.
How tough is it mentally to defend like Karjakin has been doing?
I think mentally these two guys are just two of the best in the game, and I think at this level, really, even at my level, there's a strong mental game is kind of critical to get there in the first place. So these guys are good at that. I think it's much more important to stay physically fit, so that what you're playing the 7th hour of the 4th game of the match as well as the 1st hour of the 1st game. And Magnus has always been extremely athletic. That's something I would praise him for. I think a lot of chess players sort of understand this is important but don't actually act on it. And at least in my opinion, it's a very critical element of chess. And Karjakin, I've seen him around a bunch, and he certainly never had any weight problems or anything like that. But he never struck me as super athletic. But when he came here, he just looks different. I think it's very clear that he's been taking his physical training regimen very seriously, and I think that speaks well for him for the future of this match.
And what you're saying there, Magnus has already done that for several years, hasn't he?
Oh yes, Magnus is always playing sports all the time. And I find actually a lot of chess players are very athletic people. We're very competitive in our nature. We like games, and sports are just like chess in that regard.
Let's hear from the fit Sergei Karjakin on Bobby Fischer.
What can you say about Bobby Fischer?
He was one of the greatest chess champions ever, and I want to be like Bobby Fischer.
You do that now as well? Want to be like him?
Yes.
Who is your favorite chess player of all time?
I think this is Alexander Alekhine.
Why?
Well, because he had very hard life, and also when he won his match against Capablanca, he was clearly not a favorite for the match, and it was a huge win for him.
And now, being back in New York City, we know the Soviet Union lost the World Championship title to Bobby Fischer, and now you're in New York. Would it feel like the ultimate payback for Russians if you could win this title here in New York?
No, maybe this is a little bit too deep to think about this. I don't know. I just want to win my match.
You were obviously not born in '72, Sam, but what's your thoughts on that game?
Well, Fischer was ahead of his generation. There's no doubt about it. I'm not a great chess historian, but I think there have been very, very few other times, if ever, in history that you had one player who was just so dominant against everyone else, all of his other contemporaries. And Fischer made some very great contributions to the game of chess. That's what I choose to remember him for. I mean, he had his problems in life, as anyone who's aware of him will know. But I just hope he's remembered for what he's done for chess, and especially in that match in '72, he dismantled Spassky even after forfeiting a game, and he was so clearly the best, and he was sort of the founding father of professional chess as it is today.
Now Magnus Carlsen clearly is the best. When do you think we'll have an American world champion?
Well, Hikaru is certainly the guy to watch. I mean, he's grown up in America forever, and he's certainly the best of the homegrown players. But I think the biggest obstacle to America getting its next world champion is not America itself. It's just that Magnus is extremely good, and he's been very dominant over recent years. And I think the first step towards an American becoming world champion is someone will have to dethrone Magnus. I guess you could hope it's an American. And then after that, if it's not American, the American could dethrone him. I don't know. I'm optimistic enough to think maybe I'll be the next one, but that's obviously a long time from now.
You're about number 60 in the world. What's the biggest difference between your level and Magnus Carlsen's level?
That's a tough question to answer because, frankly, if I knew, I think that difference would be a lot smaller. Clearly, guys like, I don't know, top 10 players are just better than me. I've played with them a bunch, and I can clearly tell they're better than me. I've never played against anyone who I thought was so good that I couldn't reach their level. But I feel like all the things I do well, they also do well, and just a little bit better. I've never actually played with Magnus, though, and he's on a league of his own. To put it in context, the difference between him and number 5 or 10 or something is probably the difference between me and that level. So or maybe even less, actually. Yeah, less difference between me and number 10 than number 10 and him. So it's definitely a whole nother level.
There's been 4 draws so far. Are you surprised?
I'm not wildly surprised. I think oftentimes when you see two competitors playing in their first World Championship match against each other, you'll see a lot of draws at the beginning. For instance, I recall the Anand-Kramnik World Championship match. Kramnik opened with the exchange Slav in Game 1, and the game was a draw. And then the Anand-Carlsen match, the first one, was also 4 draws at the beginning. And here, while we've seen 4 draws, Magnus is pretty close to wins.
We just saw Sergei Karjakin in the lounge coming here. What do you think? How do you think he will enter this game?
I think this is a very critical game for him. He's been struggling for the last 2 games, and he really only held both of them by the skin of his teeth. And I think he's well aware that if things keep going this way, he's not going to defend like this forever. And ultimately, this is a match. He will need to beat Magnus at some individual game at some point to win this tournament. And for that to happen, he's going to have to step things up. I think that if he can turn things around and say today with the black pieces, achieve a very easy draw without much discussion, and then be playing white in both games 6 and 7, that will be very good.
What about this guy? Will he just continue the way he's doing and hope Sergei Karjakin to crack?
I think that's exactly what Magnus should be doing. Things have clearly gone well for him so far. He's gotten very good positions in the last 2 games and never been worse at any moment. So I think if he's patient and just keeps doing this, that Karjakin will eventually crack if he doesn't improve. The thing that Magnus should try to avoid, and just based on his body language, I don't think he's showing, is some kind of frustration that he's getting these great positions and pushing them for hours on end without actually coming through with wins. But he is the world champion. He has a very strong mental game, and I doubt he'll get frustrated like that.
But how impressed are you with Karjakin's defense?
Well, I've always had the opinion that Karjakin's defensive play was the strongest element of his game. If you look, he doesn't have that many decisive results, but a lot of guys at this level don't. But I think the reason he has a lot of draws compared to others is not that he's deeply theoretical or anything like that. It's just that when he gets bad positions, he does not lose them, at least not often. I mean, I recall in the candidates, he only lost 1 game to Anand, and it took like a huge amount of effort for Anand, and then he saved a lot of less than pleasant positions as well.
Sergei Karjakin is in the players' room, sitting in his chair. How are these minutes now before the game is starting?
Well, everyone is different. Karjakin looks totally focused. I would expect no less from one of the best players in the world playing in the World Championship match. I know, speaking from my own experience, that I'm always just totally tunnel zoned on everything on the board. People have come up and talked to me. I'm not trying to be rude when I ignore them. I just literally do not hear them. You just you get this sort of level of hyper focus that I guess you could call the basic fight or flight response in humans that is generally triggered when you're playing under such high stakes.
Is it scary, even for Karjakin, who is top 10 in the world, to have Magnus Carlsen sitting in the chair right over you?
I don't think so. I think anyone of this level is fully aware that what you need to do is come to the board and play good moves, no matter who you're playing against. And I think Karjakin is more than ready to do that. I don't think that any kind of fear is involved.
You think Magnus look confident?
Yeah, he looks like he always does. I mean, Magnus has very good poker face in general. I mean, if you look at him, you can't generally tell what he thinks of his position. He's a little bit robotic at the board, which I think is exactly the way a player should be at this level. You don't want to give anything away.
Let's move into the players' room. And Kaya, what's it like in the players' room?
It's great to see all the photographers here. Both players are here. Magnus came in last, as you guys saw. He's writing down his name on the paper right now. They look well rested today, I have to say. After a rest day yesterday, we know Magnus played some sports. Karjakin took a walk in Central Park. Magnus is touching his pieces right now, getting ready for this day 5. And we also have an exciting first move maker today. That's Bennett Miller, the movie director. And Magnus is drinking some water right now. The players are not looking at each other as always before the game. And I can just imagine what's going through their heads right now before this day 5 important game. Back to you, Knut.
Sam, how are these tense minutes?
I don't know. I mean, for me, I just don't notice anything around me. I generally like to walk around to keep my head straight. These guys clearly feel differently because they're sitting at the board. They're probably just trying to remember their preparation at this point. I'm sure they both came well prepared, but with so much opening theory nowadays, it's very hard to remember everything. They're probably going over lines in their head. That's just my best guess. But
what kind of opening do you expect today?
I really have no idea. With Karjakin playing white, I would say just classical e4 and probably Spanish from Carlsen, because that's what they've been doing both their whole lives and in this match. But Carlsen playing white has taken a lot more liberties. He played the Trompowsky in game 1, which I never really regarded as a very serious opening, and Magnus didn't get much out of it. And then he even switched his first move in game 3 to e4. And he didn't play the most challenging line against the Berlin, but he played like a real variation that is contested somewhat frequently at top level, and it seems like he got a reasonable position out of the opening. So, I mean, if we're going on the past experience, he might just go e4, or he might just say, I don't know, time for another new move on move 1 with knight f3 or c4. I really don't know. Magnus, one of his best assets is that he's very hard to predict.
And here we see director Bennett Miller, who is going to do the first move today.
So suppose Magnus will indicate to him what that move will be?
Yeah.
He was nominated for 2.
Now we soon will see the first move of game number 5 of the Chess World Championship 2016. There's Sam, we have it.
All right, so Carlsen will be opening with e4 unless he decides to take that move back. I doubt that will be the case. But, well, Karjakin played the Berlin last game, and I think he's going to stick to his guns. That's the kind of player he is, and it's what he has at least showed so far. Okay, so Magnus has kept the move e4, and I will predict another Berlin, because I believe that's what Karjakin is prepared for the match, and he's going to stick with it. And so far, my prediction has held true. So knight f3. Knight c6. They're both clearly quite comfortable so far. So bishop c4 or bishop b5? I can't see. I think that's bishop c4. So Magnus wants an Italian? Bishop c5 as well. So we have, this is classical Giochio piano. In fact, I actually saw Karjakin get completely thrashed with black here at the Olympiad against a friend of mine, Pentala Harikrishna. but I imagine he'll be coming with some improvements. So here, there's a lot to speak about in such a position, but moves are coming pretty quickly, so I think we should just go forward for now. D3, castle. And I played H3 here, actually, last tournament's Millionaire Chess with white, which I thought was interesting. Let's see what Magnus wants. He has played A4. So this is also possible. The point of A4 is he's, in addition to gaining space on the queen side, this bishop on C4 here is a lot of cases attacked, and it likes to have this retreat square on A2. So now Karjakin, I think, is thinking for the first time. So here there are lots of playable moves for black, but I guess we will see what he has in mind.
So what do you take from this opening then?
Well, the Italian game suits Magnus very well. It's a pretty quiet line at the beginning where there's not that much going on, and he wants to play a long game with a lot of maneuvering and wait for mistakes. And these are the same kinds of positions he's had the last 2 games where he's outplayed Karjakin. And so Karjakin has played d6. So in general, black would prefer to play the move d5, but there's a lot of concrete reasons that might be difficult. So I think it's a first success for white that d6 has been played instead. But if I recall, Karjakin played a setup with a7 to a5 in that game with Hare Krishna. So it's possible he will just believe in this system and say and correct his error from that game, or he will deviate earlier. I don't know which he has in mind. Okay, so Magnus has played c3. Now white is threatening b4, which would win a piece because the bishop would be trapped. So black has to play either a6 or a5. This is sort of a moment of decision, and Karjakin has played a6. So with this move, he's hoping to retreat the bishop to a7 in the event of b4. And now my guess is we'll get some more moves pretty quickly.
Is it possible to say yet if Magnus has been able to surprise Sergei in the opening?
I don't think Karjakin is out of his preparation. Whether or not he's surprised by the Italian game, I don't know. But I think Karjakin clearly is still in what he has prepared, and he may be for several more moves to come. I think the opening is not even close to over yet. And Magnus has played b4. Bishop a7, and if I recall here, people were often playing knight a3 to c2 as a new plan. But Magnus played rook e1, and he has got up from the board. So rook e1 is a little unusual in this position, normally because black will be trying to play the move knight g4 and attack the f2 pawn. And generally white will try to avoid this by playing h3 first, but clearly Magnus doesn't mind. One funny tactical motif I've often seen is, now that the f2 pawn is hanging, white would like to play the move d4 to hold the center. In this specific case, he would be losing a pawn on b4, but I think even more importantly is there's a very nice tactical motif that's good to remember of knight takes d4, queen h4, where black's piece sacrifice is only temporary because there's hanging pawns on f2 and h2 near the white king. And one very funny line here is knight f3, queen takes f2 check, and queen g1 with a funny smothered mate with knight f2 next. I feel reasonably confident Magnus will not be blundering into this.
Sam, sorry to interrupt you, but we're so happy to have director Bennett Miller in the studio. How was it to make the first move?
It was a thrill. It was a total thrill.
Why? How did you experience being in the players' room?
It's different watching the broadcast, which, by the way, you guys do a great job. But it's intense in there. It's very intense.
What's your relation to chess?
I learned when I was a kid. I always loved it. I went to NYU and discovered Washington Square Park in the chess circle. This is in the late 1980s when it was kind of in its heyday. And I discovered what I did not know, which was that there are levels and leagues that were, beyond conception. And spent more time than I should admit. And the process of dropping out of school, I had a real kind of chess problem, like a 12-hour day, 7 days a week, Washington Square Park. And ultimately, it was the kind of thing I had to say, if you don't stop now, there's no coming back.
Well, it's kind
But
of
I-
like Magnus, though, being obsessed with the game.
Yeah, it's a lot like Magnus, but without the talent.
Sam, we just let him move, so
we
we'll just
gotta
take
move.
that.
So Karjakin has played knight to e7, which is a very typical move in this structure. The knight on c6 is misplaced because the pawn would like to come to c6 and then d5. So Karjakin is rerouting the knight to g6, where it will hold the king side together and maintain the defense of the e5 pawn and whatnot. And if I may say so myself, you're a big chess fan, but I speak on behalf of all my colleagues when they say chess is a big fan of you. I remember actually at a training camp, we had Moneyball streaming in the background while we were analyzing, and so, you might like chess. We like you too.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Do you play chess on set?
I stopped doing that after my first film. But I did play a little bit of chess on Capote, or the end of Capote.
Why did you have to stop doing it?
There isn't enough time. There isn't enough time, and it's consuming. In fairness, something happened?
Yeah, we just had a move. Just go
Yeah,
back to
so
it.
knight
Yeah.
bd2. I mean, we're still in very early phases. This is a little bit unusual because I think in this line where white plays a4 and b4, the knight usually comes to a3 and c2. But that's also with the rook still on f1. So with the rook coming to e1, knight bd2 makes a lot more sense, since white would like to sort of follow black's footsteps. Black's taking the b8 knight to c6, e7, g6. White takes a slightly different route, but is hoping for knight bd2 to f1 to g3 to get to the same sort of area of the board.
Bennett, have you ever thought about directing a chess movie?
I have thought about it. It's not easy.
Why?
Why? Because to anybody who loves the game, you understand that chess is a language, and if you don't speak the language, it's hard to appreciate. You know, when you
Yeah. Okay, so it seems like Karjakin
I'll finish
is
that in a moment.
Knight g6. Not a wildly surprising move. I don't have anything new to say. The knight's going where I said it would go.
The way you feel as positions form is very hard to communicate. So you can make a film about chess, but it wouldn't really be about chess. You know, the only way to really appreciate chess is to play it, I think, and develop a fever for it.
Yep.
You said you went to Washington Square Park a lot.
Yeah.
We also went there yesterday. It was a fantastic place. So many great personalities. Couldn't that be a movie idea? Make it about someone
Well,
who makes
there was a
living
film
over.
that was set in that
Was it?
world, which is Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Uh-huh. Is that more of like a documentary? I haven't seen that movie.
No, it's a narrative feature based on the true story of Joshua Waitzkin. And in it, you've got players in the park that are portrayed by actors, but you see there's a homeless person who beats him the first time he comes, and that's based on a player named Zilber, who was Russian, and then via Israel and France ended up being a homeless person. He was an IM who lived in Washington Square Park, had some mental issues, but he was one of these characters. Vinnie Livermore was portrayed by Lawrence Fishburne. And you see some of the old characters in that film, but it's a narrative.
As a New Yorker, what do you feel about having the World Chess Championships here?
It's exciting. It's been a while. But it's exciting. I could just take the subway down here. What's happening?
So we had a new move and a very interesting one, d3 to d4. Now, this move takes a big share of the center for white, and if he can maintain it, then he's just going to be better. For example, if white can reroute his pieces, knight f1 to g3, let me just make some arrows here. Knight f1, knight g3, h3 to control the g4 square, bishop e3. He'll have a very robust center. This will control some key squares. We'll notice this bishop on a7 is firmly blocked by the pawn on d4, where it's locked out of play. That's just extremely unpleasant for black, which means he has to do something very concrete. Luckily for him, there are a lot of concrete options here. For example, e takes d4, c takes d4. This seems to give up the entire center, but black is ready to strike back with either d5, after which something like e takes d5, knight takes d5. All that's left of white's proud center is an isolated pawn on d4 ready to be attacked, or he could try knight takes e4 here with the idea that after knight takes e4, d5, that he's winning his piece back. So after d5, I'm not exactly sure what Magnus would want. He might be thinking about something like e5, but the problem is normally you'd be aiming for this position with this knight still on e7 here, so that black would have to take back with the pawn and compromise his kingside. As is, queen takes f6, and I'm just not sure what white has. So I'm very unsure what Magnus wants with this central break, because I think that Karjakin does have a lot of tools at his disposal to try to break down the center. So Magnus played this move quite quickly. I doubt it was an over-the-board inspiration. I'm sure if that were the case, he would have taken a lot longer on it. As is, I think black has to act right now to keep white from just taking a big center, but I think he has multiple ways in which to do so.
What would you choose in this position, Bennett?
Don't make me embarrass myself.
Well, it seems
But-
like you're a pretty good chess player.
No, I'm not. But these are the kinds of positions that make me anxious because it gets complicated quickly, and at least it feels a pinch more aggressive, and it does feel like a preparation.
I think if Karjakin has not prepared this specific position, he should be ready to spend like half an hour here, because what black chooses at this moment will completely dictate how the entire middle game battle will be decided. If he takes d4, he is completely conceding the center and must start immediate and direct active operations. To my eye, they look like they're working so far, but that represents 30 seconds of my own analysis. Well, if Magnus is prepared, that means he will have done lots of work with his team and lots of computers on this. So it's very hard to go into very complicated lines when you know you might be playing against a computer.
Bennett, what fascinates you the most watching players at this level?
Well, it's the human factor. It's knowing what the pressure is. It's knowing how long they've been sitting there and concentrating. When you have a player like Magnus, who's not as wildly aggressive as he was when he was younger, he's just become a more methodical grinder, where the tiniest advantage seems to be the end, although the last two games showed otherwise. It's knowing how unforgiving it can be while you're human, while you're dealing with that pressure.
How will you describe your level right now?
In chess parlance, I'm what you would call a potser or a wood pusher.
So you still play a lot, right?
I've given myself a limit.
You're giving yourself a limit
Yeah.
because otherwise you would play all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. Talking about movies also, bet you've seen Pawn Sacrifice.
I didn't see it yet.
You didn't
no.
see it? Is that something could you actually make a movie about, like a world championship? Do you think that was a good idea, how they portrayed Bobby Fischer?
I know it's a hard one. I've actually thought about that story years ago. I thought about doing that story, and I think he's a very complicated character and very difficult to treat because of what became of him. I do think, though, that the focus on the personalities that we had back then, on Fischer and on Spassky, that chess could afford a little bit more of that.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know more about all of the players.
Yeah.
Like during the candidates, I'd love to see broadcasts that show like where they're from and who everybody is, to know more the narratives of their lives. I think that would be really interesting.
And that's one of the fantastic things about chess. There's so many original, great personalities.
It's half the reason I ended up spending so much time in Washington Square Park. I mean, these are all original thinkers. These are all eccentric characters. You can't be into chess without having a furnace of passion. And so, I think there's a lot more that could be done to appreciate who the players are.
What do you think it will do for the sport of chess taking the World Championship here to New York, to the World City?
I have no idea. I couldn't answer.
We'll wait and see.
I mean, yeah.
We will. Sam, take us back to the board. What's happening?
Well, I think Karjakin is out of his preparation. As I've said a second ago, I think he should be taking half an hour here because this is a very direct position. I think just looking at it without computer help, my guess is black is a few moves away from equalizing. But you will have to be very precise in a very sharp position, and this requires a lot of precision, especially considering Magnus currently has more time than he started with, suggesting that he's well in his preparation. I really think black has to break the center somehow, but the more I'm wondering... He's played c6, which I don't like. This seems very passive. Because as I've pointed out, you'll see with my little diagrams here, is I think if white sets up this structure, he's just going to be better. And I don't think c6 is very good at pressuring the center. If black was not going to take on d4 or play d5 or something like this, I could consider a move like rook e8. The point being this is prophylaxis against knight f1. If this knight were to go away after e takes d4, this pawn on e4 would have insufficient defenders after something like this. In addition, knight f1 is also tough to deal with because bishop g4. So really white should be playing h3, but it's kind of tough because if white has to play h3 before knight f1 and then knight f1 is hanging the e4 pawn, while this setup that I've showed will just lead to a white advantage, it wouldn't surprise me if it's completely impossible to achieve because black has too much pressure on the center. I don't love the move c6, but I don't see anything immediately wrong with it either. For instance, white, if he were to play knight f1 now to try to get knight g3 in, black has several options. I think once again something like this would just be fine. And now maybe knight takes e4, something like takes in d5 looks absolutely fine for black to me. He might just be better. He's going to get his piece back with a better pawn structure and bishop pair. And otherwise, I mean, c6 is preparing d5 in theory. I wouldn't be surprised to see Magnus play a move like bishop d3 or bishop b3, just getting this bishop out of the way of d5 in advance. Bishop d3 would be natural because now that this pawn is protected, knight f1 becomes more credible, but unfortunately bishop d3 runs straight into knight f4.
It's very early, Sam, but the computer says a slight advantage to white. Do you agree?
I would not trust the computer in this position so early. I think a lot of these have potential to just liquidate, and often the computer will give a big advantage to the center. For example, there's one opening that black can play, not against e4, called the Grunfeld defense, where he just gives up the entire center from the start but attacks it from the side. And at first, the computer always thinks white's better in those positions, and you have to sort of beat it until it understands that it's wrong.
Is it possible Karjakin has prepared that move, and you say you wouldn't favor that move, but is it possible by doing it he surprises Magnus?
I don't know. I mean, and c6 is not a move that would come to me naturally just looking at it, but I haven't analyzed this exact position, so if someone has analyzed this exact position, I think their conclusions will be much more valid than mine. Based on Karjakin's time management, having spent 6 minutes, my guess is he has looked at this position, but not specifically for this game, and was spending that time trying to remember what he had prepared at perhaps an earlier date, because I think he would have spent significantly more time if he was actually out of theory here. And now Magnus is spending some time.
Can I ask you a question?
Fire away.
When you talk about positions that someone's might have examined before and he's trying to recall them, to people who don't play chess, it's hard to imagine how much you bring in terms of memory, like how many games and positions these guys will have in your head.
Okay. Well, just let me interrupt briefly because white has played h3. Which is just a natural move for this structure, as I've pointed out, because the g4 square could potentially be occupied by a knight or a bishop. Anyhow, but back to your question of memory, there's just a huge amount, especially in modern chess, where there's all sorts of databases of computer against computer games that are played at absurdly high level and so much concrete theory. In general, I don't really believe in the concept of a photographic memory. I think we're humans, we're not cameras, but when people speak about photographic memories, they're often talking about the kind of memories you'll see in great chess players.
Yeah. And how about for yourself?
I have a very good memory. I wouldn't call it freakishly good, but very good. I mean,
when you see chess players looking away from the board often.
Bennett, sorry. see chess players, you see Magnus. He's now taking a nap again in the lounge.
But he's not.
I guess
he's not shutting off. What's going on?
I think he's taking a nap. I think he's covering his eyes to see nothing, but potentially the position he's seeing on his computer and trying to remember all of his lines.
He's seeing the board and seeing lines.
Yes, yes. At least that's what I would be doing, and I assume Magnus is capable of that. I think it's a pretty fair assumption.
Is it that a usual thing to do for a chess player, or is it typical Magnus?
A lot of players have an easier time remembering their analysis if they're just looking into blackness and just covering their eyes or closing their eyes or something. And I certainly find it works for me. I know a lot of others who feel the same way. Some others just don't care, but I mean, clearly Magnus is one who sort of like looks into space when he's trying to remember something. But I've definitely noticed for myself that you get old a lot younger than you want to admit, and my memory is not what it was when I was 19. But, well, I'm not senile just yet. I still do pretty well.
And before we let you go, Bennett, Kaja, do we have any questions for him on the social media, maybe?
People haven't really started writing to us on our social media because I haven't reminded them yet. You have to tweet us on World Chess 2016, the hashtag, on Twitter and on our Facebook page, World Chess. But I have a question for you, Bennett. The movie Moneyball, there's a lot of, it's all surrounded about all the statistics and making a strategy for buying the baseball players. Is it inspired by chess in any way and your relationship to chess?
It's not inspired by chess per se, although the sorts of analytics that you saw game entered chess before they entered baseball, or at least entered in a practical way. I think people have been examining stats in baseball for a long time, but nobody employed them. But I guess there are similarities in that people tend to imagine that chess, like baseball, can be completely reduced to statistics, that everything could be, bitted out and reduced into information, bits of information. But there is a human factor to it as well. And there's every reason for this game not to be compelling, because computers are stronger. And yet, it just, for me, has only gotten more interesting over time.
Well, I think that's the case with baseball, too. You can make machines that will pitch fastballs that are completely unhittable for humans, but we still watch the World Series all the time. And I can definitely agree that there's a lot of the same decisions and strategic stuff you were speaking about in baseball, because before I discovered chess, I was an absolute baseball junkie, and I knew all the stats. I was reading the almanacs and stuff like this, and so it certainly appeals to the same kind of people, baseball stats and chess.
You read the Bill James stuff?
I'm not sure about that, but when I was 12 years old, I took a fastball to the face, and that was kind of that. But yeah, not a good day. Maybe I was 13, I don't remember. I was young, and the kid was big, and he could throw very fast. And
in baseball, if there's all sorts of ways of cheating in baseball.
Yes.
And they say if you're not cheating, you're not trying hard enough. But it's acknowledged, I think, or some in baseball have told me, that if a computer is able to call the game, meaning instead of the catcher saying what pitch to throw, that there's every likelihood that the weakest team in baseball would become dominant immediately.
Really? That much?
Yeah, because it's too much to crunch. There's too much information to crunch.
Would the computer be looking at all the previous batters and whether they're hitting well against fastballs or sliders or that kind of stuff, or what would it actually be doing?
It would look at everything. It would understand in situations that resemble this, how like the pitcher is 67 pitches in, and in this kind of situation at this part of the order, and with the facing a batter with these peculiarities, it's a lot for a catcher,
It's not very human.
Actually, tomorrow we're going to have Murray Campbell in the studio. He's one of the creators of Deep Blue. So it's going to be interesting to hear what he says about the computers in chess and how they created the computer that played Kasparov.
Yeah. I'll be impressed when they can make a computer that mind's losing.
Yeah.
That feels
That's
pressure.
a great sentence right there.
Well, I kind of stole it a little bit from Tom Stoppard.
Ah.
I have a feeling that day is not coming anytime soon.
No.
But Bennett, there's been 4 draws. We're on day 5. What's your predictions for the match in total?
Well,
seeing the first games.
I think people get in trouble when they make predictions, as we've seen in this country.
That's what we've seen from the last 2 games. Everyone's saying Magnus winning.
Right, but it does seem that Magnus is putting so much pressure on, and Sergei is a little bit, has created opportunities, has created chances. It seems as if it's mounting, and
it seems like it is a month for surprises in the States.
Yeah.
So anything might happen.
I was surprised by H6. The other day. What's that?
Oh, sorry.
The other day.
Oh,
yeah, the knight H6.
Game 4. No, Bishop took on H6.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the sort of move you would see in the park. You know, I mean...
If I recall, I think Karjakin said he basically just missed Queen C6. Yeah. And if Queen C6 didn't exist...
It would be crushing.
I don't know about crushing, but it'd be very good. And so... I mean, and if he doesn't see a reason not to do it, he should take this pawn. But at the same time, I mean, you got to think to yourself, okay, this is the best player in the world. He's just going to donate a pawn in front of his king to me without any particular follow-up. And maybe he was expecting Magnus to take the exchange on e4, but after Queen c6, it's sort of a one-move refutation, and you see it and you're immediately like, oh, I just traded h6 for e4. That's not where I want to be. So.
And then the hesitation to get back to c1.
Yeah, that's not good. But I somehow, despite the fact that Karjakin is thinking harder and clearly is, at least if he's not out of his preparation completely, which I think he is, if he's not, he's struggling more to remember it than Magnus, suggesting he hasn't maybe reviewed it for today. In spite of all that, I think Black is absolutely fine here and should have ways to break down the center. I think Black's, at least at this moment, I don't see any major issues for Karjakin.
He's been thinking for almost 9 minutes now. That's not unusual, is it, at this point?
Well, I think the first move out of preparation, especially in a position as dynamic as this one, where White has forcibly taken the center, and you're going to have to fight him for it, or else you're going to end up worse not too long from now. You're going to have to spend a lot of time. I would expect, if he's really out of preparation, I'd expect much more than a 9-minute thought. But the last move being 6 minutes, my guess is he was just trying to remember. At this point, I don't know. I mean, the problem is if he was trying to remember, say, a move ago. Sorry, let me just promote this variation. So previously, he played c6. And it's possible he was spending 6 minutes remembering exactly what happens if White plays knight f1 or d takes e5 or queen b3 or bishop b2 or a5 or any of these other moves that could be possible. And h3 hadn't occurred to him to try to remember that. So I don't know. My guess is Karjakin has this in his analysis somewhere, but is really struggling to remember it because he hasn't reviewed it in many months when he's had so many lines to prepare. He probably was taking the Roy Lopez and stuff a bit more seriously and whatnot.
When Magnus Carlsen met Anand, his goal was to make Anand think of his own, he said. Is that what he's making Karjakin to do now?
I think if that's the case, and it looks like it is, that's a big sign of success for Magnus. I think he would be happier making Karjakin think in a position on his own where there are less forcing lines, because I think those are the places where Magnus' superiority will show more clearly. But as long as Magnus is winning the opening battles just in terms of who gets out of preparation first, even if Karjakin finds a bunch of good moves and equalizes and ends up with like 40 minutes left on the clock and Magnus just keeps on playing forever like he has last 2 games, Karjakin could find himself in some trouble. But still, when I look at this position, I don't fear for Black's safety in any way.
Okay, Bennett Miller, thank you so much for having you in the studio. It was a pleasure.
It's been a total thrill, and I appreciate it.
And we're looking forward to a good chess movie in some years.
What is your next movie?
Well, I don't think I'm ready to talk about
it. Okay. We're going to be excited to see that.
Thanks much. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. In the meantime, maybe I can take some questions from the social media.
Yes, go ahead.
We have quite a lot of questions now, actually. I'm going to start, but a lot of people who tuned in late are asking about Judith. She's not here today. She's going to be away for 2 days. She have other commitments, so we're so lucky to have Sam Shanklin here. American GM who's doing a great job already. And we have a question for you from Sam Thompson. He says D4 appears to be the move recommended by the engine. That's what you've been talking about as well, right? And he says 8 games already played this move, but none at the top level. Does that mean that this is extremely complicated for them to remember any games with this position?
Well, keep in mind, I don't know what database this guy is using, but probably the one that most people are using are just human games. Well, a lot of the stuff that is going into preparation is looking at correspondence games and engine versus engine games, and those are special databases that, frankly, I find excessively boring, but they're also very, very important for understanding these structures. I guess that just means this position hasn't yet been seen in human practice, and hopefully for Magnus that means Karjakin doesn't know it so well, but and he's still thinking. So, yeah, I guess I don't know. I guess I would just say Karjakin is clearly not ready for this position, or at least not in his preparations. So that's a sign of success for Magnus.
But Sam, could you give us some possible lines here?
Yeah, so just like before, I think black needs to be breaking down the center. So if he's going to do that, he can try taking on d4. I haven't really considered what happens if white takes with a knight, but it sort of looks weird. After something like d5 takes, there's a lot of hanging stuff in white's position. Like knight takes c3 is not an easy move to prevent. And white really doesn't want to take on d5 and just give black the bishops on an open board. I mean, of course white should be trying to take back with the pawn on d4 to maintain the big center. But if black can get away with either knight takes e4 or d5 here, I would think that he should have an absolutely fine position. Say d5 and takes, and it just seems quite fine for black to me. His knight on d5 is excellent. His pieces seem good enough. White's pawn on d4 is weak. I think black looks totally fine, but I don't know. Maybe Karjakin is worried about something or other. Knight takes e4 is also a move, aiming to win a piece back this way. This looks a little less convincing to me because of the move bishop g5. And after f6, maybe something like bishop f6 and bishop b3, pointing out that this knight on e4 cannot be taken due to this pin to the king. And now black's structure has been somewhat compromised. Even this doesn't look that bad to me. Something like king h8, the knight now has to move and say, I don't know, maybe knight c5 and rook g8, and black can play knight f4 and look for counterplay on the king's side. Frankly, I think black should be fine here. I mean, I must be missing something because I can't imagine Magnus just playing into some line that black makes like 2 good moves and he has a very comfortable position. So I'm missing something here, but without a computer, I don't really know what. And this is a kind of situation where you start to doubt yourself over the board. You're like, well, I think I'm just fine, but my opponent, the best player in the world, is just confidently rattling off moves that he's already prepared at home, so what gives?
Is that the X factor of Magnus Carlsen?
I don't know. I think it's disconcerting to play against anyone rattling off moves because, I mean, Magnus with a ridiculous computer is going to be better than a 2400 player with a ridiculous computer, but not that much better. I mean, it's large, especially like in very complicated positions like this one. The ridiculous computer is just really, really good, and it can be disconcerting to be playing against someone who's just blitzing off other moves like they already know what they're doing. Because you want, even if it's Magnus, you want to play against him. Because he's the best player in the world, but he's a human. And you don't want to play against the machine.
I have some more questions, Kaja?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions now. A lot of people have noticed that they got into an Italian opening.
Yeah.
In general, does those games usually end in a draw or a...
Well, the Italian definitely has a reputation of being quiet. In fact, this specific variation of it is called the gioco piano, and I don't speak Italian, but I'm told that means quiet game. So it's an especially quiet position. But and especially in the era where the Berlin has been dominating at top level so much, where it just kills all the play in a largely forcing manner, it's not surprising that the Italian has picked up quite some following. I've actually played it myself with a lot of success.
Winning a lot of games with it?
I haven't lost yet. Yeah, I've beaten a few GMs. I beat Sevian and Lamy and a bunch of others, but and I Yeah, Norway's own Jan Ludvig Hammer. He's going to hate me for saying that. Sorry, Jan Ludvig. But
well, maybe Magnus has been watching some of your games then, going into this.
Well, I picked up the Italian from him, not the other way around. Let's put it that way. But no, I mean the Italian, it's making a comeback at the top level. I mean, I've seen a lot of nice wins in the Italian recently. Nepomniachtchi has won a few games. I saw Kramnik, who's not even an E4 player, just demolish Anand at the top Memorial. I mean, Italian is making its new renaissance.
It's cool. We also have a good question from Don Lee, because you guys were talking about memory of chess players, and he's wondering how many different openings would you estimate are memorized by GMs like Magnus and Karjakin?
Basically everything there is. I mean,
and what's the number of openings then?
Well, it's hard to say number of openings because some openings are much deeper than others. I mean, I'm sure there are people who know more openings than me because they know the name of the move, like 1b4 and 1b3 better than I do. These just aren't serious moves. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of line moves in my analysis at home on my computer. Maybe even past 1 million at this point. That's a lot.
Do you think, or how happy do you think Magnus Carlsen is with this position right now?
Well, he's gotten more time than about the same amount of time he started with. He's clearly gotten his preparation. Now, maybe his preparation was utter nonsense. It wouldn't be the first time with him because he often doesn't really want the opening to count for much. He's happier out playing people in the middle game.
And there we have a move.
Okay, so Karjakin has taken on d4. So it is the move I was suggesting. I wanted it last move, but and I wanted this move as well. But it seems like he's agreed with me that the center should be targeted right away. Magnus is taken back immediately. To get back to your question, I think Magnus knows exactly what the evaluation of this position is because he's in his preparation. If he knows the position is equal, he's like, how happy can he be? I mean, I know I'm not better, so we'll see. But he seems reasonably confident. I'll be very interested what Karjakin does next. I think he will either take on e4 followed by d5, or he'll play d5 directly. I think both should be fine.
And he's put right back to thinking again.
Yeah, I suspect he'll move pretty quickly. I mean, when you play a move like e takes d4, there's only really one serious response from white. It's not like he was surprised by what Magnus did, so he's going to play either d5 or knight e4. I'd be shocked by anything else.
We have some more questions for you, Sam. Randy Ferguson is wondering if you can describe a typical day for a professional chess player.
I mean, there's a lot of different professional chess players out there. A professional chess player at number 200 in the world is going to have a very different day than me at number 60. He's going to have a very different day from Magnus. So I can tell you my own experience. I get up in the morning, usually somewhere between 8 and 9. I'll stay in bed with my computer and generally be following the games played in Europe, which are just finishing at that point. I live in California, so 8 or 9 a.m. is like 5 or 6 p.m. in Europe. So games are just starting to finish.
Like tournament games or just any game?
Yeah, so if there's any serious tournament going on in Europe, the games are like sort of winding down at around the time I wake up. So it's a good time for me to go over them and watch them. I'll get up, usually shower or gym, one or the other. If I don't go to the gym in the morning, it'll be the afternoon. Cook something for breakfast or lunch, maybe do some teaching or some writing in the morning and be working on chess for most of the afternoon. And then obviously when I'm playing tournaments, I just have my tournament schedule. So
you're able to make a living from chess at number 60 in the world?
Yes, definitely.
But how many chess players are making a living of chess, you think? Is it possible to estimate?
Well, I don't know, and keep in mind that there's very different definitions of making a living in different countries, so I'm probably the only actual professional full-time chess player in California, but that's also a place with a very high cost of living and not that much chess, so it's not that surprising to not see it. Well, I would imagine for Karjakin's native Russia, where there's chess players everywhere and chess is a huge part of the culture, I would think that a lot more people are making a living there than they are in, say, America.
Karjakin is doing some thinking here, Sam. He's not making
that's
a move right away.
Surprising. I mean, I would think that if he was thinking about this position, he should still have the pawn on e5. If you play e takes d4, you should know what you're doing next, because I can't imagine him expecting Magnus to take back on d4 with the knight, so I think sooner or later he's going to play either d5 or knight takes e4.
Are we going to see a game with the same dynamics as the two recent games today?
I don't know. It's a very sharp position right now, but I think it also has the potential to just completely liquidate. I think it's possible that a whole bunch of pieces are going to get traded in like the next 6 moves, and we might just see a lifeless draw. If Magnus can maintain his center and Karjakin doesn't manage to break it down, he's going to have some major problems.
And the first alternative there is obviously what Sergei Karjakin wants.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great for Karjakin would be to just make an easy draw with black today, make 3 or 4 good decisions, draw the game in less than 2 hours, after suffering for the last 2 games for a long time, just to make an easy draw with the black pieces and then get 2 whites in a row is like exactly what he needs to set things in the right direction.
But as you see it now, what are those 3 or 4 good decisions?
Oh, it's not so easy to say, but I would think that, and he may have already made a mistake by e takes d4. I happen to think not, but it's possible that I'm just wrong. I would think one of d5 or knight takes e4 has to be played here. They both look fine to me, so I'm really confused as to what Magnus wants. Although actually now that I'm thinking about it, even that, I was thinking perhaps knight takes e4 will get into trouble with something like takes d5, takes and knight g5, where queen h5 is going to hurt, but my guess is h6 is still pretty much okay. Something like queen h5, h takes g5, queen takes g6. I don't know. This queen is very nice and everything, but I don't actually see a threat. Like, I'm curious if black can play queen takes d4 and make threats of his own, like queen takes f2, queen takes a1, compelling bishop e3, and now queen f6. And I mean, what you could also be greedy and grab on b4, but I mean, this just looks absolutely fine for black to me, so I don't know exactly what Magnus has in mind. He's down 2 pawns here. Now, I imagine he's not going to go into that because it doesn't look good, but for a second I was worried that that might be a problem, but it seems like even that's okay. And still, d5 just looks by far the most natural move to me, to immediately destroy the center.
So what you're saying is that Magnus probably knows something that we can't see at the moment?
Yeah, I would not put it past Magnus to just completely bluff something and just like as if there was something there and hope the guy doesn't attack the center, thinking that he's going to get scared. That is definitely something he's capable of. More likely than not, I'm just misassessing this in some way or missing something, but I really just don't see an issue for black after d5. Or knight takes e4 for that matter.
In general, Sam, what do you think is the most exciting thing with the matchup between Karjakin and Carlsen?
Well, Karjakin, I think, represents Russia's new generation. There was a while where Russia, previously the Soviet Union, was incredibly dominant when they had first Karpov and then Kasparov and then Kramnik, were just seemed to have a stranglehold over the world championship. And, you know, when one world champion lost, it was to another Russian or another Soviet. And that era largely ended when, say, Anand beat Kramnik and then Carlsen beat Anand, and you haven't really seen Russians there. And all of that older generation of Russians, I mean, Kasparov's retired. Kramnik's still playing and playing well, but and Karpov's retired, of course. Kramnik's playing and playing well, but I don't know how much longer he will be. He's certainly not a spring chicken anymore. And there have been a lot of sort of good Russian players a bit younger, I would say maybe like Grischuk or Svidler, but none of them really rose to the same level as a guy like Kramnik. And I think Karjakin making it to the World Championship match is the first of the new generation of Russians to make it. I think it sort of is a sign that you might see more Russians on the way. And so,
and it was interesting, ahead of the candidates tournament, Karjakin was ranked number 9, but still Carlsen held him as his favorite to win the candidates. Why do you think?
That's just a very impressive prediction. I think Karjakin's a great player, and I think people were discounting his chances way too much, but I certainly didn't think he was the favorite. I believe in the rating system. It is a mathematical function of your wins and losses against your other players and your peers. It has no bias in it. I didn't see any reason to think that, you know, Karjakin, who came into the candidates number 7 out of 8, was the 7th most likely to win. And in such a tightly compact field, that might mean, I don't know, if there's 8 players, it's like 12.5% for each. That might mean Karjakin was only 9 or 10%, but that's still a very real number. It's just a very impressive prediction from Magnus, if you really believed that.
Yeah, he said that, and he was talking about his defensive skills and his mental strength.
Well, both of those are clearly Karjakin's best assets. I mean, I think Magnus is better in a lot of ways, but those are not two of them.
And what about the question about the matchup I was mentioning? We were talking about Karjakin, and what about Magnus then, up against Karjakin?
Well, this is Magnus's first time playing against sort of a classical Soviet.
We have a move from Karjakin.
Okay, so knight takes e4 was played as a move I was suggesting as one of Black's two main possibilities to destroy the center. And I think Black's just fine.
So you think it looks good for Karjakin here, having Black?
The only thing that makes me question that is that Magnus has moved so fast and seems to be in his preparation, but to my eyes, Black looks absolutely fine here.
In the computer size, it's now 57 white, 43 black. Does that tell you anything?
Maybe there's some funny business here. So knight takes e4, d5. I'm wondering if white just goes absolutely bonkers with knight g5, what happens? Because if takes, there's take on h7. Takes, queen h5 check, and knight g5. Even this doesn't work, just rook e8, and the knight controls the h8 square, so there's no checkmate. Yeah, so that doesn't work. I don't know, maybe the computer is just seeing something I'm not. It's also possible I'm just totally misassessing this position, and after something like just simple, I don't know, bishop b3 takes and just take back, that this bishop on b3 is gearing down on f7 really nastily, and the bishop on a7 is passive, and that means more than the isolated pawn on d4, so I might just be misassessing the position with the computer getting it better, but yeah, come to think of it, this actually doesn't look that comfortable for Black. Like, if you could take the light squared bishops off the board, I would say Black's just better, but as is, with this bishop gearing down on f7, it's not only does it add some pressure with moves like knight g5, but it's also quite hard to develop the c8 bishop to a good square. And that makes it hard to develop the rest of Black's pieces. And this bishop on a7 is passive, hitting the d4 pawn. I'd like to come to b8, but that locks in the rook. So maybe just something simple like this is what's going on. I was sort of put off by the isolated pawn at first, but maybe this is just a little better for white.
Now I'm excited to hear from the venue, Kaja.
Yeah, because just before this fifth game started, there was a launching of a new book here, and it's a quite exciting, different type of book. I'm here with one of the authors, Larry List. Can you tell us, what is this book about?
This book is Rare and Beautiful Chess Sets, and the organizers of the event wanted to commemorate both the creativity and the genius of the players with the entire 15 centuries of creativity and genius that have gone into the design of chess sets and chess boards and chess pieces.
So can you actually open the book and show us, because it's mostly pictures, right?
Yes, it's pictures and text written by John Krumiller, a prominent collector from Princeton, New Jersey. This is one of his sets, a beautiful Indian set. Sets like the propaganda set and other related ones from the Dr. George and Vivian Dean collection. Yes, this is insects, sort of butterflies versus moths. And this is one of the many pieces in the Dean collection. And they have both written at length about their various ones. And I was invited to write about the 20th century. I'm an independent curator and have curated a number of shows specifically about chess-related art, everything from the 6th century Persia to the last 15 minutes. And it's been a continuous stream of the world's greatest artists and artisans designing things based on, as they say, the royal game.
What do you love so much about chess sets?
What I love about chess sets is the same thing that I love about watching terrific players play chess, that with these same 32 pieces and the same 64 squares for 15 centuries, people have been able to come up, it has been a wellspring of innovation and creativity and variation, still sort of that we're discovering new things about with each passing game and with each new design.
So we're talking about chess being a sport, but the actual chess set is more like art, right?
Yes. Yes, the finest of the chess sets can indeed be art, whether they're made out of beautiful, rich materials, as some of these are. Look at these beautiful sort of bead-encrusted pieces. Or when they're very simple, like this by the surrealist Max Ernst. Simple wood, but the forms are very sort of unique and based on sort of Eastern island art or African art through the lens of surrealism and modernism, and even quite radical in terms of this set by contemporary artist Takako Saito. This is a playable chess set with the same 64 squares in the same order, with actually even standard Staunton pieces. But don't you feel that it transforms our expectations of what chess can be?
This is a great one. And I want to tell you guys, I have a fantastic chess set at home. It's Italian marble, bought at the St. Phil Cup 2 years ago. So it's nice to have something.
Wonderful chess event.
Exactly.
Yes.
So get this book, people. I think it's going to be really interesting for people to look at the beautiful pictures and hear the histories.
Absolutely.
Back to you guys.
Thank you so much, Kaya. Do you have a lot of chess sets in your Bay Area living room?
No, I have a specific room in my condo just for training. Let me just keep this position on the board. It's the live one. I have a specific room in my condo that's just for training. It was technically listed as a bedroom, but I specifically bought a place with an extra room because I wanted a training room. And I never go in there for any reason other than train, and I just have one standard chess set. It's a very nice wood set, but it looks almost exactly like the set they're playing on now, the set that I play on in all my tournament games. I think it helps me for it to feel exactly like the real deal would while I'm training. It makes training more effective.
What's your thoughts on chess sets being art?
It's cool, I guess. I hope it brings more attention to the game, but I'm much more concerned with the gameplay itself than the wood the chess is made on.
Talking about chess books, what is your favorite chess book?
Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual is the book that made the strongest impact on me, and as such, I wouldn't say I was devastated, but I was very saddened to hear when Mark Dvoretsky passed away just a couple months ago, because I think that was a book that really had a strong influence on my play.
You mentioned you were writing articles. Will you be writing a chess book sometime?
I don't know. That's a bigger time commitment. Articles don't take me that long, and they don't really, and I can work them around my training schedule and stuff. A book is, I'm sure at some point I will. I just think while I'm an active player, it's probably not the best time. It's just too much of a time commitment that I should be training.
Back to the chess set here, and Magnus Carlsen have been thinking now for almost 8 minutes.
Okay, so this probably, oddly enough, is a good sign for Magnus, because if he has prepared something up to this point, he will have checked what all the good moves are in the position, and he was playing very quickly, so he probably reviewed it recently and knows what the good moves are, which means it's possible knight takes e4 was just a mistake. And now he's thinking, okay, I'm out of my book. I know this was not a good move. I now must punish it appropriately. But the only thing that I found so far, just poking around, was the thing I've just described, where after knight takes e4, d5, instead of anything elaborate with some kind of knight g5 or bishop g5, that white simply retreats his bishop. And after something like this, claims that this bishop on b3, gearing down on the f7 pawn with knight g5 coming soon, and the bishop on c8 not having great squares, and the bishop on a7 being blocked, means more than the isolated pawn on d4. And the more that I look at this position, the more I'm coming around to that point of view. So I think Magnus will do this. It also suits his style very nicely. But we'll see.
What type of game does this look like? Oh, there it goes.
No, he took on f7. Wow. Okay, so Magnus wanted this position. This I'm very surprised by, because I thought it would leave black with a very nice light squared bishop. But basically, black is going to take this bishop back. There's nothing else to it. And then white will take the knight. So the pieces will be exchanged like such. And
but why is this a wow?
Well, it gives up the bishop pair. And in particular, if you recall what I was speaking about in the previous line, was that after knight takes e4, d5, bishop b3, take on e4, rook takes e4. The pride and the power of white's position is this b3 bishop gearing down on the f7 pawn and preventing the c8 bishop from developing. While if you take in comparison this position after bishop takes f7, sorry, I'm goofing off here, bishop takes f7, rook takes f7, that bishop is gone. And now this bishop on c8 is basically unopposed. And that just seems like not what white wants to be doing. But this also has some concrete motifs. White clearly wants to invade with a move like knight g5. So what black would love to do is play bishop e6, taking control of this all-important a2 g8 diagonal, and then bishop d5 next, where the bishop will be rock solid, put a lot of pressure on white's center. He'd just be much better than, but unfortunately this loses material on the spot to knight e to g5. So that's certainly a tactical point behind Magnus's play. In general now, black has a very compact pawn structure here. He has the bishop pair, a nice open f-file for his rook. Black is statically better. So Magnus must have some very concrete, very dynamic lines in mind. And yeah, he has played knight takes e4. So now Karjakin has to think about this position, how best to organize his pieces. I would be very tempted to play h6 to stop any business with knight g5. And after something like queen b3, you might not get bishop e6 in, but still something like bishop f5 strikes me as basically fine for black. He can play queen d7, rook e8, and I don't see a way to punish him for this right away. Yeah, I'm not sure what Magnus has in mind there. But I do think it's really worth black's time to keep the knight off of g5.
You still think black and Karjakin is in a fairly good position?
I think black's fine here. I think what Magnus has done, taking on f7, is very risky. I don't think it's bad. I think white probably is doing okay. But if things go wrong for white here, they will go very wrong. While in, say, this previous position I was discussing, knight takes e4, knight e4, d5, bishop b3, takes. White has some pressure. If it doesn't work out, he can play d5 and liquidate, and the game will just be drawn. While in the position we're seeing now, after bishop takes f7, rook takes f7, knight takes e4, if something goes wrong for white, he's just going to die. I mean, he's going to be facing a bishop pair with more pawns in the center and an open f-file for the rook and a healthier structure. I mean, it's risky.
We're soon, Sam, going into the second hour of this game, and what's your prediction now? Is this looking drawish?
This is the only game of the 5 so far where I genuinely have no idea after the first hour. If I had to pick a result, it would be draw. But if you also offered to drop me into one of the chairs, I would probably take black. I don't know, I could just be completely wrong, but this is a very hard position to assess and will take a lot of concrete calculation. So I'm really unsure of what's going on.
But can you explain why this position is more hard to explain than the other ones?
Because there's a lot going on here. As of okay, black has played d5. That changes a lot. That makes it a lot easier to understand because the structure is much more fluid and much more forcing. If black had played h6 instead, he might have been worried about white playing d5 anyway himself. Okay, so this knight is attacked. It has to move. I would imagine something like knight g5, and I think Karjakin's point is to just play rook f6 and say this knight on g5 is a bit of a paper tiger. It doesn't actually do anything. It's not coming to e6. So probably what Magnus would be more likely to do is knight c5. And he wants to potentially play a move like a5 and clamp down as hard as he can on the dark squares and get moves like knight e5 in. Still, I don't think black should be worse. Now that d5 has been played, I would lean towards a draw being the most likely result. While if black had played h6, I would think it's just a mess with a lot of all three results very possible.
Okay, thank you, Sam. We're about to go into the second hour of game number 5 of the Chess World Championship 2016 in New York, and we'll have a short commercial break.